Hello everybody and welcome back to the second part of the Crystal Paints tutorial. We're going to be going over base color today. As you can see here in one of my renders, we have the red version of the crystals. In here we can also see some rust. Just a simple rust to kind of match the art style. We will also be going over, I use some different color techniques that I haven't used before. Nothing too crazy, but there are some cool things that I learned that I think can be cool for stylized textures to kind of help you have more color variation in your materials. So let's hop right into Substance Designer. All right, so here we are. I'm going to, like I said in the height part. We do have different presets here, and the one you just saw the render of is the red one here. I'm going to be hopping in between a bunch of these because some of them have different parameters turned on or off, or I guess booleans. So I'm going to go through this real quick, pause the video, and disable these, and then we'll get started. Okay, so we're back. So I've disabled my emissive, my metallic, my roughness. Right now we just have the height, and we're going to be going through the albedo or the base color. So as usual, base color is all about layering. The more you layer, the more detail you can get, the more interesting base color, just an overall better material. And of course that all depends on what art style you're going for. Okay, so let's start here with a uniform color. 2048 by 2048, since this is the initial base color. So I have this one. I turned it into a parameter, as you can see, because of the blue text. So I don't think I do this often enough, so I'll go over it real quick. So what I did is I picked my initial metal color or frame color, because that's what we're going to be starting with. And then I go to this drop down here and I do expose this new graph input just like you would with a boolean. And then, I called it, I think, metal color or frame color. Or I guess this one doesn't really matter. Whoops. Like that, and then just call here, this is the proper one. Oops. So once you do this, you will lose these values, and it'll look like this. And then to access it, double click outside off any node, just on the background, and then you'll get this here. It'll probably start with parameters. So here you can go if you set a preset, but if you want to change the default, you would go into the parameters. And then find, I think I called it, metal color, or it should have been frame or whatever. And then you can change your default here. And then if you want to have different presets to see which one, if you want to compare different ones, then here you'll see metal color, and then you can turn it up and down, whatever you'd like, different colors. We want to do gold instead of like steel, or I don't know, I'm not a blacksmith. You get the point. All right, so we're going to start with this gray here. Oh, I think this is a 0 on the H, 0 on the S, and then 0.5 on the V value. So it's basically just like a neutral gray. All right, so the first blend here will obviously just be a copy. And what I did here is I wanted to have like a secondary tone, very subtle, because it's all the same metal technically, but I wanted to have a very subtle difference between, or I guess kind of like an accent. I think I do the same thing here, but I don't do it as strongly as the nails. So I do have like your base gray, your nail gray, and then your like I forgot what I call these, the spikes. So from the uniform color, I just do an HSL and I just darken it. So then whenever this changes, this will also change based on this. So that's why I pull from it. If I had another color, then I would have to be managing two colors every time I want to make a switch. maybe you want that. Maybe you want one to be gold and the other one to be steel or iron or whatever. But in this case, I just want this to always be like a darker version of this guy. So I use my mask's nails here. So then obviously just goes here, pretty basic. And then we do it again. And then I have a boolean here because, you know, I might turn off the spikes. So you don't want to have this always be there, because if you turn off the spikes on the height, but you keep it in the color, you'll have the color of the spikes, but you won't have it in the height. So obviously you'll need this to double check for that. For this HSL, I just did 0.35, and then for this one I did 0.425. You can obviously choose your colors. And then here we use the spikes mask, plugged into the opacity into a copy. So then you can see here we have our 3 colors so far. These are just base colors, so we're going to be layering on top. And then obviously if you don't have the spikes, then you go from here. If you do have spikes, then you go from here into true, and then this one to false. Pretty easy. Now here, so we start adding some texture, I guess, to our base color. So what I did, I created just like a very simple, quick brush like noise, as you can see here. And to do that, I started with a Grunge Galvanic Large. Let me just make some space here. Keep this zoomed in so we can see what's happening. You can see the settings here, and then I blurred it a little bit. So we went from that to this. And then I did a max lighten, and I used a Grunge Map 002 default. I blurred it again because I didn't want it to be super harsh or contrasty. And then I max lighten them to kind of mix both of these together. And if you notice, this one is more like up and down, or what's the word, vertical noise. And then this one kind of has like a bit of a curve, right? Because here you can see it's kind of like curving this way, and this one's kind of curving to the left. So I use a mix of like curved and more straight, I guess, to create this guy. And then I take a shape set to paraboloid, and add sub it to get this. So the main takeaway here is that you can see that in the middle it's more solid than on the edges, so you do have like this like fading effect on the all around because of our shape fall off here. And then I stretch it using a transform 2D. You can see the values here. So we stretch it to give it that like brush or that brush stroke look. We plug that into a pattern input, a tile sampler grayscale. I went with 12 by 12, and obviously looking back, it would probably be a little bit better if I had like increased the amount. But you can also do that with you know, just tiling. But if you tile this too much, it'll become very noticeable. But if I had done more of a, you know, increase the, let's just try it, 24 by 24, and then so this already looks like it's 2 times tiled, but it's all different. Actually, that looks pretty cool too, stretching it that much. So yeah, if you ever want to make something longer, you can always do it in the size here, or you can also just do like a 2-to-1 ratio, or, you know, 1-to-3, whatever, just to make it longer on one direction than the other. So if you want to try different strokes, you know, that's fine. We'll just go back to with what I went with. So 12 by 12. Pretty much everything's position random, offset 0.5, rotation random, obviously, unless you wanted to have all the brush strokes in the, you know, general direction. Color random will make it so that some are further back than others. Otherwise, they would all just be like that. So this gives it depth. Blend in mode max, and then you can use max random here if you want to have less, if you want to, or have more. You know, up to you, but I went with 0. And I think that's pretty much it. Then I auto levels it to make sure I get the full range. And then here we have our noise clouds, basically our default clouds into a slope blur. And just to kind of add more on that brush look, because here I wanted to, you know, make it look more, I don't know what the word is, but you know it when you see it. So we went from this to this, and I used max. You could probably use any of these, honestly. Probably not blur, probably one or the other, but I went with max. And then again, I auto level it, and then I create a mask for this because I use this throughout the rest of it. So I made a portal, call it mask, and then call it brush. I guess technically it should have been noise, not mask. So yeah, let's change that. I think I meant to do that, but I forgot. So noise brush. And then here I transform it. I increase the tiling up to 4. And then I use a scan to break it up a little bit. Otherwise, it would look like this. And I wanted to get rid of some of the brush strokes. So I use a scan to do that. We take our flood fill random color distanced all. So this guy. And then I vector warp grayscaled it, so that this noise doesn't run through the nails and the frame, because obviously the nails were created separately from the frame, so I wanted that to reflect on the noise. So we have this, and we used our all flood fill. So what I wanted to do here was use this noise, obviously, to apply to the entire metal. So I just took the result from before here, and I just did an HSL, and I just increased the light. I just made it a little brighter to 0.55, and then that goes into the foreground, and then this goes into the opacity. So then you get this. So we go from this to this. And again, I didn't want to go too crazy. I didn't want to like jack up the, because that just doesn't look good. So I just want it subtle, just to kind of add some breakup, so it's not just a solid gray. And then here I kind of do it again, just to add another layer. So I do the same thing I do here, but I have less strokes. So if you notice here, I already removed some strokes here. And then here I kind of do the same process, but I reduce even more. And I do the same thing. I just increase the lightness to 0.525, the result, into the foreground. So we take that brush noise again. I think I rotated it 90 degrees, I think, just so that it's not this, so the strokes aren't sitting in the same spot. So I always just like rotated 90 degrees every time I use one, just 90 degrees, 90 degrees. So I keep it rotating. Then we scan it. I want a lot less strokes. And then vector warp again with the same flood fill here. So then we go from this to this. And this probably should have been a different color just to kind of spice it up. Maybe like a very, very subtle saturation. And then maybe you could have done with like a, I don't know, maybe something like, this is very sensitive. So let's go with like that. Just to kind of add maybe like some more color to your metal, so it's not just gray, but you can play around with different colors or different values in the HSL. But I'm going to undo all that just to keep in line. But yeah, I think the more color you add, you know, the more stylized result you'll get. Then after this, we have, what's going on here? Okay, we just add some like subtle noise again. Because if you kind of like blur your eye, if you were to blur this, or you can look at it by blurring your eyes, it kind of all looks like gray, right? Except for here, because this is like a lot brighter than the rest. So what I did is I just added some noise here to kind of break up the, like this big chunk kind of looks the same, even though technically it's not, because it's like different values. But it's kind of hard to tell because they're very close to each other. So I just threw in some noise on top of everything to just kind of break it up. So to do that, I just took our basic clouds 1 noise, and then I think I just, yeah, increased the tiling, scanned it so that it's not everywhere, auto levels, and then I used the levels here for fun because I didn't yeah, nothing changed. So you don't even need this. Then I blur it a little bit. And then our vector warp. And then we do it with our, this guy, the usual suspects. Feed that into the opacity, copy. These are probably mostly all going to be copies, except for a couple towards the end. But yeah, so we go from that to this, just, again, just to break it up. Then here we start adding where, or we color this guy that we made in the last part. So we're going to use the where mask here, plug that into the opacity, and we're just going to take the result here and HSL it with a darker value. Because all I wanted to do was, you see right here where it kind of gets pressed in, I wanted that to be darker than the stuff that's above it. Again, just to break up the middle. Then after that, what's this? Okay, so here I just did some shading. Because if we look, I wanted this part of the frame, like down here, to kind of be like, you would assume it'd be dirtier there. So I wanted this to kind of be darker as it goes to the top. And then obviously it's going to be cleaner at the top. So as you can see here, I just kind of add some shading on the slopes. So I took the previous result as usual, and I just did a 0.4. And you could do individual colors for all of these, but the downside to that is that if you make a change to something like over here, you'll be more likely to want to change the rest of these. But because these are all coming from the previous result, then it all kind of comes down the line together. So if I were to change this to, let's say I wanted to make this gold, I'm just gonna do it very roughly. Maybe like there or something. Let's say I wanted to go with gold, then everything's kind of based on that initial color. But if all these they're all independent colors, then I'd have to change this one and that one and that one and that one and that one, and it would just be too much. So this way it all kind of drives from the initial color. But I don't know, yeah, that's not gold, that's something, some new metal. Okay, so we left off over here. So yeah, for this one I just did a lightness of 0.4, so I just took this and I darkened it, and then I obviously, because I wanted this to be darker, so we took the AO frame mask, which I do remember we did this one. Okay, so yeah, so it comes from here, and then we just, you know, darken the deep spots. And then here, what's this? Okay, so this is where we start kind of adding some edge highlights, and I just realized I didn't name these, so apologies for that. I wanted to get this out of the way for you guys, because I don't like having, like, starting a tutorial and there's only like the first part, and then it's like 3 weeks before the second part, because then what's the point? So I wanted to get this out quickly. Okay, so yeah, so we start adding some highlights. So you can see the highlights here on the crystals, but obviously we're gonna paint over it later. But it's also on the metal in some areas, and I broke it up, and that's what we're gonna look over now. So what I did here is I started with my final normal. Actually, I don't think I covered this part, but if we go all the way over here, after our placeholder levels, because this level is just here as a placeholder. So from here, we make a portal called height final, and then that goes into the height. And then from the final, it goes into the normal, which I think I went over this 7.5. And then, you know, from that normal to the normal output, I made a portal. And then for same thing for the AO, called this one AO final, and this one, yeah, I guess this should be normal font, just to kind of stick to my naming conventions. But I think it should be final first. That way all your finals kind of come up together, but whatever. So we use that normal, that final normal, which I think was right here. Yeah. So let's look at this result. So we take that portal, the normal final, curvature smooth, and that gives us 3 outputs: the curvature, the convexity, and the concavity. We're going to be using the convexity, which is the middle one here, into a scan. Very high values here. And then you could just use this, but then it would look like this. So let's do this. And that might, that does look kind of cool. Not too bad. But for me, it was like too uniform because it was kind of like, it was highlighting just the highest points, which is what we want, but I wanted to break it up so it's not like that. So once we have this, I slope blur it, and then I do min because I want to cut into it. Otherwise, if we did max, we'd go out of it. I want to go or carve into it. We use our noise Perlin 32 here. And then after that, we scan it a little bit because I didn't like this super gradient fall off here. I wanted to kind of tighten it up so there's a clear start. And then here we subtract some of it. So if we look here, it's kind of going evenly everywhere. So then I just use a noise here to kind of subtract and break it up. So there's some areas where there are no highlights, and some areas I have more highlights than others. Again, I didn't want it just to have like a blanket uniform highlight. So I took my brush noise. So this guy that we made earlier, I increased the tiling. Again, I scanned it, and then I warped it with this guy as usual. And then I subtracted. Then I kind of did it again, just to kind of add more breakup. And for that is I took my black and white spots 2. And our default moisture noise. Add sub it. Blur it. Oops, always have your quality up to 1. And then we increase the tiling. We scan it. I took a transform 2D here, and I think I just rotated it, and I moved it a little bit. So let me round this up for you people. Yeah, so I just rotated it 90 degrees, and then I added them together, I'm assuming. Yeah, add linear dodge. And then, again, subtract, just like I did here, because we want to break it up, so we're taking away. And then we do it again. We use just the black and white spots 2 this time. Scan it. Increase the tiling once. Subtract again. And then I blur it to kind of blend everything together because I didn't like these harsh spots. So I just kind of blurred it a little bit. 0.2. And then that goes into the opacity. And then we have our broken up highlights. Then after that, I think we do another pass on highlights, but this one is much tighter. So again, I take the normal final, and I take the convexity again. And I guess I could have just dragged from here, but that would have been too messy. So I just kind of did it again over here. So this is what we get. And I wanted to tighten it up a little bit. Probably tightened it up a little bit too much, but you can play around with it. Probably turn down the contrast a little bit. Yeah, I think I like I don't like seeing like the anti-aliasing, so maybe I should have done with like 0.8 maybe. Maybe 0.9. Yeah, I think that looks a little bit better. Maybe yeah, like that. 'Cause I still want to keep it tight, but I don't want to make it so tight where it's like, oh, here are my stepping pixels. So yeah, that kind of looks a little nicer. It kind of blends in, almost like a little blur. Okay, so we made that adjustment. So after that histogram, again, same process. I just want to break it up. So I take a grunge map 1. I messed around with some values here, just some random stuff. And then I histogram scanned it. Took my favorite flood fill here that we've been using. Vector warp it. Subtract. Again, to break it up. So you can see we cut some of it here. And a little bit over here. And then I blur it just a tiny little bit. Probably go. I think if you go any more below this, I think it doesn't do anything. So maybe you can do like 0.11. Yeah, I think I like 0.11 more. I mean, I think if you go like 0.1, I don't think you notice anything. Anything below 0.01, so if I do like 0.05. Yeah, that looks the same to me. So we'll do 0.11. So that will go into opacity. And then for our HSL here, we're doing a brighter value. Because again, we're doing highlights, so it should be brighter. Unless you're doing like some, I don't know, like a stylized look. Or maybe you're doing like black outlines. Maybe like a Borderlands look or something. Like black outlines. Kind of like what we did with our previous tutorial. What tutorial was it? Let me look. Tutorial 10 is kind of where we do something like this. Instead of brighter highlights, we do darker. Tutorial number 10. If you're interested in that. Okay, so let's proceed. So next, I think is where we start adding our rust. Now, I will say my rust is nothing special, but I just wanted to add like another variation or, yeah, different. What's the word? A different, like just overall color value that's toggleable. So I have my brush noise. Oh man, I have all my noises start with noise just so that they kind of come up together, like my mask and stuff. But I want to call this my brush noise, but it's noise brush and it's messing my brain up. But anyways, here for some reason I was playing around with the save transform because I've seen people use that. So I just used that here instead of a transform 2D. But same concept, I just increased the tiling up to 4. I'm tired of repeating this guy, but we get our favorite flood fill into our vector warp grayscale. Then we histogram scan it. And then we subtract by 0.2 with the brush noise again. Yeah, here we go back to normality where we use the transform 2D. And I increase the tiling here by 8, by a lot. Subtract that from here. Very subtle. And then here we subtract again by 0.75. We take our black and white spots 2. We scan it. And then here I think we increase the tiling. And then we subtract it. And then that goes into our opacity. And then there we have our rust. And I should have made this a actually I won't, just because I didn't know if it wasn't intended, but you can make this again similar to our frame color, but we do this with the crystal color. But yeah, my rust is not a parameter. I would have to change these individually. So I would have to change this one and then this one. So let's say I wanted to go with like let's say this is bronze and I want to have like that green tealish, I think it's called like patina or something, I don't know, I'm not a rocket scientist, but yeah, that like greenish rust or whatever, corrosion, I would have to change all 3 of these to the green. But it'd be cool if you could, if you set like, you know, presets where, you know, one's rust, one is like the bronze green oxidation, I don't know, I'm not a biologist. That would be cool. But yeah, in this case, I just kept it simple because this was more of an afterthought. But anyways, so that goes into the opacity, and then we have our uniform color here, and I can change these to kind of. I just pulled up Rust and not the game, the texture on Google, and I just color picked, and that's how I got this color. And obviously you don't just want to do one color, you want to add more layers so it's not like a solid, unless it's the style you're going for. Okay. So after this, we have another layer of Rust. And we took our noise cloud 2 here. We increased the tiling. Histogram, scan it into a multiply. Our brush noise again. Again, like I said, I just reused this a bunch of times. I think here I rotated it again. I think 180 degrees because both of these are negatives. Into a histogram scan. Into our multiply here, and then that goes in to our opacity. Just to have another. And actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn on this just so that we look at just the metal. And actually, I'm going to do, even though we're almost here anyways, but just get like a nice window looking color. There we go. And then for this one, this is what I used. Just round these for you guys. Or you can also just color pick on the video. And then copy. So then we have our second layer of Rust, and then we have one last layer. And you can see it's very small. And for that, we just kept it simple. I just took a black and white spots 2, transformed, rotated it, increased the tiling, histogram scan into the opacity with this color. And then I created, another boolean here or switch. And, if it's true, it's going to go up to the top. And if I don't want Rust, then it's going to pull from the bottom. So from back here, because I want to skip these 3 blends. Because this is pre-Rust stuff here. So then if I go to my preview, I can turn my Rust off and on. So I'm going to go back to presets. All right. So after Rust here, now we're moving on into the crystal base color. So I'm going to plug this back in, and we'll go through this real quick. So what I'm gonna do actually, I'm gonna go to default. That's like the blue one. So it's gonna get rid of the Rust and the spiky. So I started with a uniform color, and I made it a parameter, just like I did with the frame, with the initial super initial uniform color back here. So that way we can change the crystal color as we want. So I used I don't know if I think I've used this node before maybe. It's called flood fill to color. Basically it takes your uniform color or whatever color you have here, and you can give it a HSL random. So if we take, if we take this guy, actually it should be a new one. Okay, so if we take this guy and then we copy paste this guy and we put this up here. Actually no, it should be, oh god. Flood fill to, what's it called? Yeah, flood fill to color. And the reason why I have to make a new one is because if I copy paste this guy, it's gonna copy paste the parameter, and I want it to be a blank one. So basically, what this node does, it takes whatever color information you have, and then you can add an HSL random to it. So let's say I don't want it. I don't just want this solid green for all my crystals. I want to kind of give it a range of colors. So I can go, you know, into the negative or the positive. Think of like the hue. You can go up and down. So basically, this is saying that I wanted to go into the left side, into the yellow, and it's going to give me a range from negative 0.08 all the way up to this color. Or I can go in the other direction and go from this color all the way up to 0.12. So it's giving you a range, and it's determining which one's to color that range based on our flood fill. So it's assigning a value randomly to each island. Now this is very similar to when we do like flood fill to random grayscale. So it's like, I think what I've normally done is I've taken 2 of these. Then let's say I make this one, I don't know, something drastic like this color. And then I do this. It's kind of the same effect. But then I would have to do, just to kind of keep it the same. Got so much work to just show an example. Okay, yeah. So this is how I used to do it, but this flood filter color just makes it a little more simple. The built-in range is there, but you can also do it this way if you'd like. But anyways, let's get rid of all of this. So that's what this is doing. So it's taking this color, and then I have a range here set to here. I called it multicolor range, and I have it set to 0.05. So the more I increase the range, then the further down the color spectrum is going to go. So I did 0.05 because I didn't want them all to be the same shade of blue. And then I called this multicolor. So if I don't want multicolor, here, let me turn this off first. So if I don't want multicolor, I also have a boolean. So I can, if I want them all to be the same color, I can turn it off. But if I do want the range in color, I can turn it back on. So that's what this switch color here is. So I just called this one multicolor. And then if it's true, do this. If it's not true, just pull from the uniform color. And then here is where I add my other boolean called gradient color. What this one does, if I go back over here and I turn it back on, as you can see, what it's doing here, I'm using gradients, as you can see here, and I'm assigning these gradients a different color, and I'm layering it on top. So if I turn that off, if you don't want the gradient look, you know, you can turn it off, or you can keep the gradient look and turn off the multicolor look. So, you know, you can mix and match however you like. So to achieve this gradient look, what I did is I took my flood fill glass, or I guess crystal, and I just did a flood fill to gradient. I just turned on my angle variation all the way up. And then I auto leveled it to get the full range. And then with this level, this is what determines how far your gradient will reach. So if I increase this, if I wanted to take over most of it, then you would go up to like here, go lower. If you wanted to take less, go higher. And obviously you can see here, this is the area of effect. Or if you want to reduce the harshness as well, or play around with it. But I want it to be super gradient, like a very gradient transition. So you can play around with this level. And then I turned the opacity down a little bit. So I didn't want it to be very overpowering. I wanted to kind of be subtle, because I want the main color to be this uniform color. And then these guys are kind of just like an extra shade on top. So what I did is I took the switch color here, the result of that, and to an HSL, and then this is where I chose the color that I wanted. So I made this guy on the hue 0.425, saturation 0.55, lightness the same. So what I did here is this is basically a manual system of what this does. So if you remember how this was like a range, what I did here is this is the middle value, so like the starting value. And then here I went towards the left of the spectrum, so towards the green. And then here I went towards the blue or the purple. So this is as low as it goes, and this is as high as it goes. So then that's why when you see over here, this is one value and this is the other. And if I wanted to go down to like the red, you would change this color. Or if you wanted to maybe tighten up how purple it would go, you would bring this back a little bit here. And obviously you have your saturation and stuff. But yeah, basically these are like the two stopping points. So from the multicolor, we did the HSL. And then you could make these also parameters so that you don't have to come in here and you can just do it from here. So that goes into the foreground, and then this levels goes into the opacity, and then it gives us this. And then I want to pull again from the initial color. So I don't want to pull from this result because then it's going to change this green and it's going to make it towards the purple. What I want to do is make sure I'm only using the original glass color. And then we pull from here, so before this blend. And then these are the values that I used into the foreground. Also 0.75 here as well as here. And then here I did flood filter gradient again, but I made sure I changed the random seed to 1 because this one's set to 0. Otherwise they would look the same. Auto levels, and then here I played around with the levels again. I think I just used the same levels that I did here. But yeah, same process, opacity, and then this HSL goes into the foreground. And then the result of that goes into true because that's using the gradient color. And then, if I don't want to have the gradient color, then obviously it has to pull from before any of these two. Now you could add another layer, and then you could have like even 4 of them. So like it's one color in the center, a different color to the north, to the west, to the east, to the south, up, down, left, right. But yeah, I just did 2, and they were randomly chosen directions based on this flood filter random gradient angle variation. So anyways, that was more time than I wanted to spend on that, but the result of all of that, and then here I have my switch for gradient. And then the result of all of that is my color, glass color. And then that feeds into the foreground. And then what I did here is I took my mask frame final portal and I inverted it so that I assigned those colors to those islands. That way it's kept within the frames. Then again, I added that brush look because it's the same brush look that I have on the metal. So I took my brush noise, increased the tiling by a bunch. Histogram scanned it. And then I multiplied by the mask, the crystal mask glass or the final glass mask, just to make sure that it's not painting the frame. Otherwise it would. If I turn this back on, you can see that it's changing the frame. So you want to exclude the frame. So I multiply by that mask. And then here I take the result from here and I make it a little bit brighter. So you can see the change there. And then we take our mask crystal shaping. So that's this mask. If you remember this one from the last part of the tutorial. And then what we do here is we brighten up the edges. So I take that portal, and then here I use an invert, and then I use a levels here. And then I tighten up I get rid of some of the gradient and I tighten it up a little bit. And then I blur it. And then I slope blur it so that it's not perfectly evenly distributed like this. I want to, add some noise to the edges. I take my noise cloud 2, I blur it a tiny little bit. That goes into the slope. I use max mode. So then we get this, but this is obviously too harsh, so I blur it. I need to remember to change these qualities up. Then I take the mask frame final again, and then I subtract. So then I'm left with just this edging on the crystals. And then I use that for the opacity. And then I take my glass color portal that we just made back here, and then I just make it brighter. Now you could just use like a white uniform, but I wanted to make sure that some of the color of the original crystal came through a little bit, and it's very, 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 very subtle. So if I turn up my saturation, you can kind of see that it's a little bit blue, but it's very hard to see. But because I also blew out the lightness all the way up. But you don't want to go too far up because then it looks like that. Even though mine already kind of looks like that, but yeah, I didn't go all the way on the lightness. Set the copy. So then next here we have some highlighting on the high points of the crystal. So we take our normal final again, our curvature smooth. We take the convexity channel again, and then we scan it. Then we take our glass or mask glass final, multiply out what we don't want, so the frame, and then we blur it, and then we multiply by 0.75, and we multiply, oh, I could use my Perlin noise portal here because this is the same one. Perlin noise, so this guy. And to add transform 2D, because we increase the tiling, I use a levels node here to play around with the values. And then I auto level it because I'm obsessed with that node. And then I multiply again to just kind of break it up. So you can see here that this void, because I'm multiplying, is kind of like deleting or reducing some of that information. Otherwise, it'd be pretty solid across all of the high points. I want to, have some breakup. Auto level it again for funsies into the opacity, and then I just take the previous result and I make it brighter again because it's the highlights. And I also increase the saturation because I wanted it to be more. I wanted it to be closer to white than blue because it's the highlight. Then what's this do? Okay, it's very hard to see, but it's another highlight. Again, normal final into a curvature. This time I take the curvature. I do an auto levels. I scan it. And then I do what I did before. I remove the mask by subtracting. So then I'm left with just the crystal highlights. I take a crystal 1 noise into a histogram scan. Subtract, again, to break it up. Opacity, and I take the previous result and I make it a little bit brighter and increase the saturation a little bit more. You can see a little bit right there. Then, now here's where we really start seeing more of it. So what I did here is I darkened. So we were working with the highlights by taking the highest points in the height information, and now we're taking the low points of the height information. So we take our noise glass portal here that we made previously. I use a normal map of 5. Could probably done 10 actually. Let me see what 10 looks like. Okay, never mind. Go back. So we'll go with 5. Curvature smooth. I take the convexity again, I invert it, because I want to work with the in-between, not the highlights. And then I scan it, because I want to tighten up where the deeper parts of the crystals are going to be. So 0.025, auto it, and then again I subtract the frame. Then I feed that into the opacity. I take the previous result and I make it darker instead because I'm trying to darken the deep points. So copy, yeah. So we make it a little bit darker, and you can play around with how much darker you want to make it. Yeah, it looks kind of cool, but we'll go with the original. And then so that paints the deep points darker. And then here, I think I do a similar thing, except I kind of get the edges as well. So I take my portal from AO frame and glass. So it looks like this. I invert it. I histogram scan it. And then I blur it. And then again, I multiply my frames out. And then I kind of reduce a little bit of that whiteness around on the edges by a little bit. And then I just make this one, the previous result, darker. I think we're almost done. Yeah. So then here, I take the normal final again, curvature smooth. I take the curvature this time, auto level it, invert it, scan it, take my mask frame final, and I could just do subtract and then get rid of this guy. That'll give me the same result. So yes, I subtract my frames out. So that's giving me like this darkening around the deep parts of the crystal. I take the color, the glass color, so this guy, the initial, and then I make it darker, 0.4. Just to kind of add some depth to it, otherwise it kind of looks a little flat here. And what's this? Oh, and then these are the cracks. So the cracks are supposed to reach the deepest parts of the crystal. So I wanted the closer towards the inside of the crystal, the darker than like the high points. So I took the result here, 0.45. You can see the difference here, 0.45. And then we take our mask glass cracks portal into the opacity. Oops. And then here I kind of just add some fake AO. So I take my AO final, I invert it, auto level it, and then I use a levels to tighten it and play around with it. And then I use a black uniform color. And again, I just add more depth to it. I wanted to add some shadowing around like the nails and on the deep parts here. Just some overall shading. Or shadowing, I guess. Now here I did what I usually do at the end of my stylized textures. Or I guess materials. Take the normal final again, curvature smooth, take the curvature channel into a gradient map, default gradient map, just to turn this information into a color value. Overlay it on top. Oh, I don't know if I covered the blends actually, so let me go back. So this one's set the copy in 1, and then this one's set the copy but 0.325. Otherwise it would be way too strong, I think. Yeah. So here we do overlay, we do 0.3. Again, if not, it'd be too strong. We want it to be subtle. And then we do the same thing, but we use Curvature Sobel. Again, just to add another layer of depth. So normal final curvature, again, gradient map into the foreground, and we use a very subtle amount for the opacity in blend mode overlay. And then I use a sharpen here to sharpen. Just to kind of bring some of that noise information back. So yeah, so that's it for base color. So we went from that to that, and this doesn't, obviously we're missing roughness, because I think the roughness is what really sells it. Makes the crystal look kind of juicy. But if we go back to our presets here, I'll go back to my rusted version. But for that original render that I showed you in the beginning, I don't have the gradient color turned on, so I turn that off. And then I think I also even turn off the multicolor, so I just have it so they're all the same shade of red. It's funny because it accidentally ended up looking like blood in that render, I think. Maybe if I make it glossier rather than rough, it might actually look like blood. But anyways, I hope you guys learned something cool, something new with the base color here. And in the next one, we're going to cover, I think roughness is very short. So we're going to cover roughness, metallic, and emissive. So I'll catch you guys on the next one. See you later.